Hello, welcome to the Be a Maker Club podcast. Today we have with us Alvin Dao, who is actually a baker, so a different kind of maker for us. Welcome to the podcast, Alvin.
Thank you.
Please tell us a little bit more about what you like to make.
So, you know, I like to make anything from the simplest of like a traditional chocolate chip cookie to more French complicated pastry. For me, I like to I have a different approach. When I make the more complicated stuff, I'm not, it's like understanding the science and what's behind it to kind of replicate what's basically a work of art. And when I do something more traditional, I want to I want to experiment, I want to play with it. And I want something that's special, but still triggers that nostalgia because I feel like, and it's a hard balance because if you experiment too much, you get rid of that nostalgia.
Mm.
But if you just keep it traditional, then there's nothing special about it to me. So I
Yeah.
like to really play with it. Yeah.
So I think what was very interesting about how you described the activity too, I felt at least, was that you were quite focused on sort of the look and feel, if I because we're talking about food here, right?
Hmm.
And I thought it was interesting that you didn't start off by saying, "Oh, I like to make things that taste in this way."
Hmm.
So is that did I read that correctly?
Yeah, so there's like three hallmarkers that I tend to just go for goals. I want to go for taste, obviously, texture second, and appearance. Those are my three markers that I kind of want to achieve that like an ideal pastry. Yeah.
So is like taste like a given, right? It's got to taste,
Yeah, it's got to
right? It's
taste
like a
good. Yeah.
benchmark, right? Yeah, you didn't voice it because you're like, okay, that it's got to just it has to obviously taste good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting. Okay, so before we get more into the pastry side and the
Hmm.
actual baking process, tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, uh, you know, do you have any formal training in design and in any kind of creative process? And do you apply any parts of that? You know, tell us about that.
Yeah, so I actually don't, I'm all self-taught and I don't have any training in like any type of I'm actually like I can't even build I could barely build a chair, if I'm gonna be honest. But it's a lot of was just self-taught learning, watching videos, and lots of trial and error, lots of failure. I think one thing a lot of people tell me that they don't like baking versus cooking is because, it's kind of set and done. You do it and then you put it in the oven and it's either gonna be good, it's gonna be bad. You waste all that product, all that time. But you can't be afraid to fail and learn that way.
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of how I learned, just watching lots of videos and practice. Yeah.
So baking, you're saying, is kind of like a almost like a delayed gratification, or you learn the results in a while type of
Yeah.
thing, as
Hmm.
opposed to like cooking something in a pan because you can see it, smell it, and
Yeah.
if you feel like something's off or not quite going the right way, you
Hmm.
can instantly change it, right?
Yeah.
You
Hmm.
have to be a lot more. So do you think then maybe that's because the next question I was really going to ask is why baking? Like
Hmm.
why not graphic design or teach
Hmm.
or like what so is that like part of it where you like the hey, I planned this and I'm gonna
Yeah.
see how my plan works out? Is that
I
or
don't know. I've always had this fascination with like I mean, even as a kid, I would like pretend to like I would put a bunch of stuff in a pot and mix it and just like pretend to just see what would happen and like give it to people and obviously they wouldn't eat it because it was a bunch of inedible organic material. But I just always had this fascination with mixing stuff and seeing how it would turn out, seeing reactions. And the thing about with like I mean with chemistry or something or like the other things, it's like it's very much creative and science, and it's like it leans. I like things that are kind of a dialectical of both, it's like both.
Mhm.
And this is science and creativity, and a lot of making is that, but this seems to be heavily creative as well. And I always used to score high on creative tests, and I was like, I'm not creative. I don't draw well. I don't do this. I don't like, I don't play music very well, even though I took lessons. um, and it took a while for me to realize that I was more creative with words, with experimentation, with ideas.
Mhm.
And I get to really come up with ideas. I get to watch like hours and hours of content of like, beautiful things. And it's like it's equally about technique as it is artistry. Like,
Mhm.
when you make a croissant, you have to follow the technique of lamination, and it's very detailed, time, temperature, knowing what to do, knowing about the yeast, knowing about balancing things, but also it's like it's like doing something with your hands to be very meticulous and make it come out pretty. And I think that's the hardest part for me because I'm not very good with my hands, but the technique wise and experiment. And then there's a whole factor of experimenting with flavors too, that, like the croissant, I get to fill it with like a raspberry Bavarian cream or something. It's just like there's
Right.
so many aspects to it that it just seems the possibilities are endless. I love something that I can just keep learning about and learn forever because, yeah.
Right, right. It's almost like you once you master, and I'm going to use the croissant example here.
Hmm.
So once you master, say like the basic butter croissant, then now you,
Hmm.
oh, how can I enhance it? Can I
Yeah.
code it? Can I use it to make this? Can I make? So
Yeah.
you've got that sort of one thing, and then now you're able to push the next
Hmm.
level.
Yeah. And that's what I always say is understanding the black and white science helps you lead to the creative part because once you understand it, then you can push boundaries either to something where it's not going to take away from the recipe or ruin it, or you can use your understanding to manipulate something. Because like if you take something as simple as a cookie, we go back to taste, and the reason why I just don't focus on taste is because like, oh, this cookie's too sweet. You take away the sugar, suddenly the texture and the appearance is different. You change even the ratio of brown sugar to white sugar, the spread is different, and also the chew is different, and also how moist it stays the next day. And so they're so intertwined, and it's such a balance of like, everything, that it's just a challenge that I love.
No, that's true. So I really like how you phrased it because you clearly are using the science to push the creative limit too.
Mhm.
Um, and, I've said in other podcasts, but our background is we used to teach at Beer Maker Club
Mhm.
children how to take an idea and turn it into something, a physical product.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to give you that for reference. So the
Sure.
general steps we followed were like, hey, what's your idea? And
Mhm.
the kids did have all kinds of crazy ideas, but we'd be like, okay, let's now try to shape and form the idea. Let's discuss it and let's capture the idea. So
Mhm.
either it was captured verbally or writing or in a sketch. And then we would teach them about, okay, here's a design tool, like a software in
Mhm.
which you can try to, turn that idea into a actual design, a 3D object. And
Mhm.
then we teach about, okay, here's how you're going to make it. And I mean, this is a design, so idea, design, and make or
Mhm.
manufacture, right? This is a very generic sort of workflow. So if I were to kind of give you that as a reference,
Mhm.
how would you describe your process? Like, where do your ideas come from? I mean, from the sounds of what you describe, you've experimented quite a bit already. So
Mhm.
if you maybe refer to the last thing you made,
Mhm.
where did the idea come from? Like, how did you get inspired? And how did you capture and note the idea? And then what was your sort of design? Because clearly you're planning, right?
Mhm.
You're going to buy the ingredients.
Yeah.
Right? There's a design element, which in your case, the design and the making is fairly close.
Mhm.
But yeah. So how would you describe that process for you?
So the last thing I experimented with, and the recipe I just edited, and I actually need to test it, is right now is my scone and biscuit recipe because
Oh,
I always get so frustrated with dry, hard scones, and I don't like them too sweet where they're cakey. And so there's a lot going on there. And so what first inspired me was I basically went to a bakery and I had a really
wow.
good scone. And I could not figure out, you know, for the life of me how they did it. And so I just baked lots of different already established recipes from established bakers and kind of got an idea with what um what that recipe would turn out like. And then I looked at what factors I would look at the ratios of things and what was higher, what was used in it, if it used egg, if it used butter, if it used cream, if it used buttermilk, sour cream. And I would look at how it would turn out. And I would also research, what does this do to a
So
recipe?
wait, I need to ask you, when you say you
Mhm.
would look, what does that mean? Like, is it YouTubing? Are you actually talking to bakers?
No, so this was all on my own. Like I would look at
Okay.
YouTube, yeah, and then I would bake the recipe and I would get from my draw from my own experience, and then I would
Okay.
research forums or like other blogs or even like more established, you know um culinary websites that would explain the science behind it. Or, I mean, it doesn't even have to go. And that's, I think, what I love about baking is you don't have to go into the molecular level and like actual like food scientist level. You can stick with baking science, so it feels more
Okay.
like alchemy, you know. So instead of like understanding that, like the cream of tartar and baking soda interacting in baking powder like at a molecular level, you could just know that baking soda or baking powder will rise with heat versus baking soda will react with acid, and stuff like that, where you can understand at a more mechanical level versus in like a
Actual details. Yeah.
physiological level. Yeah. So it's like I try and approach it from that way. And then I would just start pulling from recipes to write my own. And I would write my own and have this plan, and I would plan out my technique, and then I would just bake it. And then I would just manipulate one variable at a time until I started, coming out. Like if it came out too dry, okay, then maybe I need more fat, or maybe I need more sugar, or maybe the temperature is cooking too long. But so it's a very long process. I've been working on it for years and years. And it's like close to where I want it, but there's always something that I feel like I can improve. And sometimes that frustrates people. Like my mom, she's like, why can't you just bake it or like bake it how it's supposed to be? But it's the process that is so much fun to me. So of course I could just go buy a scone or buy, sandwich bread. But the joy that I get from just making it is like something, it's just, I don't even care like if it tastes, how I want it to taste. If I'm not there yet, even if I'm not there yet, the process that I made this, it's like it brings me such a sense of fulfillment. So yeah.
So, I mean, with reference to the process that I talked about earlier, so it very much sounds like, um, with every, I'm going to call it project,
Mhm,
you have a different potential goal that you're meeting.
mhm,
I'm sensing because, it's your statement that you said where I don't really care how it tastes. Whereas, so I'm imagining, and tell me if my understanding is correct,
mhm,
is that you're probably saying, okay, well, I'm gonna do like this croissant, right? Like,
mhm,
you maybe perfected the base croissant, and then you're like, I'm gonna
mhm,
experiment with this particular thing, and
mhm,
you just focus on that and you plan that.
mhm,
And then because it's an experiment, you don't really care how it actually tastes. I mean, you want it to taste good,
mhm.
but as long as you see that experiment through, you feel satisfaction. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe I mean, I try and tell myself this to avoid frustration, but I do
No, but
want to.
I mean, it's extremely healthy.
Yeah,
The reason I was
yeah.
delving into that is
Uh-huh.
because, we work with like thousands of kids, right? Really.
Yeah. Hmm.
And the core thing that we try to teach people, and people think, oh, making is about actually the thing. Making
Hmm.
is not about things. It's actually, we were teaching, and I say this because we work with kids. We
Hmm.
were never teaching someone how to make the thing. We were teaching
Hmm.
them how to think about the process,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like the whole, that saying that goes, don't teach a man to,
Yeah.
don't give a
Oh,
fish, teach a man to fish type of
yeah.
thing, right? And so that's why I was
Oh,
digging a little
okay.
bit deeper,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
what you're saying is kind of just proving the pedagogical
Yeah.
model that
I
we
mean,
were working with.
what you say makes sense because it does bring me so much joy just planning up to that. And I feel sometimes I get more joy just from the whole process versus like actually baking or getting something out of it, because I will research for hours and hours and watch tons of videos. And that gets me so excited to just get out there and try and start doing it. And then I do it. And it's still like I feel so alive while I'm doing it. I'm like excited. I'm doing this process. I'm following my plan. And then whether it turns out whether or not, I could look at it to frustrate me, or I could look at it like it did bring me just like, 3 days of entertainment, hyperfixation or whatnot you want to call it. So yeah, it's a mentality. And so I don't always have it. It's not the perfect mentality. Sometimes I do. I'm like, oh man, this really sucks. But it is something that like I have to recognize where it does bring me joy. And sometimes it takes others to remind me that. And that's why I think I like sharing it, because I think that's the best part too about baking is you get to give it to someone and they
Mm.
either get to provide that validation, or even if it's criticism, usually they're very nice about it, and it's helpful feedback for me to refine my craft, and also just validation that what I'm doing is actually serving some type of purpose for me.
So I'm going to go back to maybe a slightly more fundamental question now that
Mhm,
we've described the process.
mhm,
Did you consider doing anything other than baking? Like, like when you first started it,
mhm,
I like, food is very primal, right? So
mhm,
it's almost everybody knows maybe how to make some kind of food. So I
mhm,
suppose, you always have that sort of comfort that this is a regular everyday thing. But was there a time where you thought consciously that, oh, you know what, I'm gonna maybe consider something else as a
Mhm.
form of creative expression?
There are times, yes, where I've like there's I where I try and draw, but like I'm like, oh, I just get frustrated. It's not as satisfactory a process, I guess,
Okay.
because but I do I do enjoy music a lot and I do sing, but I'm like I'm not that talented at it. So I still do it for a lot of fun. And I it's very weird because I approach it in the same way where I focus more on understanding it and how to make certain sounds like, like we talk about like, certain ways of singing, and I'll approach it in a similar way of understanding it and how to mimic it rather than focusing on sounding good, which is maybe a backwards way of doing it. So that's my other very passionate hobby, but I think baking is like actually something that I get validation for, and so I just stick with it a little bit more.
So I mean, would it be then fair to say that, you know, in baking, you're definitely able to ace it more than maybe in singing?
Yes, yeah, oh
And I
yeah.
mean, that's a completely fair thing.
Definitely.
Like, if you're
Yeah,
you're just better at
yeah.
this one thing,
Hmm.
and I mean, you get all the other creative satisfaction and planning
Hmm.
and fun, but you're just better at this one thing
Yeah,
than singing. So you're like, hey, I'm gonna do this more.
yeah, definitely.
So
Yeah,
of course, like,
yeah, you
I,
still
I think it's
indulge in
pretty
the other one,
normal.
but
Yeah.
yeah, you just have fun. Yeah.
And so, if we kind of go back to say maybe your childhood or some,
Hmm.
was there like somebody in particular that you admired and maybe you've drawn inspiration from, or you've seen someone, or is this like a completely brand new thing that you just started by yourself?
It's interesting because not it's not really because I mean I used to bake with my mom, she baked, but it's not something that like my mom was always she when she approached recipes always by the book, and she doesn't like a
Mm,
lot of crazy flavors, a lot of experimentation. It was kind of like, oh, I feel like baking, let's just do something real quick, or let's use a box mix, or for a special occasion. And I would always be eager to help, and I would be sad when it was over.
yeah, okay.
And it wasn't I kind of found this interest on my own in high school, and it was, yeah.
So wait, when you went to high school, did you guys get the opportunity to study any part of this in school?
No, it's actually when I got to quit a lot of my extracurriculars and I started watching Food Network. And that was kind of like I was so fascinated by people who cook, because my family, we were so busy where I did about five extracurriculars. My older sister did five extracurriculars. We were expected to make, really good grades. So I didn't really have time to find any hobbies that I wanted to do, right? And when I saw, and we also ate dinner in the car, usually,
Oh
something that
wow.
was mass meal prepped or frozen
Okay.
meals. We would eat it in the car on the way from our one activity to the next activity. So it
Oh,
was like I got interested in cooking and baking at the same time. And I'm a much better baker than a cooker. And Yesh will, and a previous guest will attest to that. But, I just found like this so fascinating that people could make something and then enjoy it. And it just brought people together. And so I started watching a lot of that before I got into it myself. But yeah.
okay. That's pretty cool. What tell me, like, what was the worst thing you made, or like maybe a disaster that
Mhm.
maybe, that time was maybe a little bit painful, but eventually you thought it was funny?
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, I have disasters all the time. I had a disaster yesterday. I
Oh,
like tried to make a buttercream in a different way. It's a French buttercream, and traditionally you boil a sugar syrup to 240 degrees and drizzle it while the egg yolks are whipping in the mixer on max, and so it cooks the egg yolks, and stabilizes it without scrambling them essentially, and then you whip in butter to make the buttercream when it cools down. But I tried to do it the way some influencers do it, where they do it over a double boiler to kind of simplify the process, just because I was short on time. And the sugar didn't dissolve, and it was all grainy, and it was terrible, and I had to throw it out, and it's a waste of like tons of butter, which is expensive. And I was very sad, and like I was upset. I was at I was actually at the bakery and I was like, I called my boss. I was like, oh, I just wasted all this product. I feel terrible. And she's like, I'm not that kind of boss. She's like, she's like, snap out of it, Alvin. She's like, I don't care. She's like, we're here to experiment to make things easy. If it doesn't work out, we go back to the old way. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And she's
Right.
like, that's what you're here to have fun. And, and I love that because I do bake as a hobby, even as that part-time job. It's just, it's to de-stress from my actual
So
business.
wait, so you have a part-time job as a baker too?
Yes, yeah. So that's my
Oh,
part-time
okay.
job. Yeah. I was doing it while I was in school and then I started
Uh-huh.
an internship and then now that I was getting the hang of things at the internship, I'm back at the bakery for 1 day a week. So, yeah.
Oh, that's okay. So that's so you actually have like almost like a good a means to production, but also you get to see the commercial app. So tell me
Mhm.
what's the difference? Like how do you feel when you make, in the job as opposed
Yeah.
to when you're making your own projects?
Definitely it feels a little bit more so you get creativity, but there's more of an agenda. And so you have to, your goal, there's more pressure too, because when someone comes to you and they're like, I want this to look like this, I want this to taste like this, I want it to, feel like this,
Right,
then you have your goal set for you, and you know and then you have a time limit too for when failure is. So it's like,
right,
I
right.
definitely, you want a proficiency before you make into that
Mhm.
next leap and a great understanding. So sometimes it can feel a little bit less of that sensation I get when I do it on my own, where it's just such a warm fuzzy feeling. And so it's more of a like, I'm good at this and this is a purpose that I can help use to, you know, give me means of life and, like income and stuff. And it's better than if I were to teach singing or drawing or something. So it's like something that I've turned into a use for me. Does it take a little bit joy sometimes? Yeah, but it also doesn't too.
Yeah.
So like,
No, I think I've been in situations like this where, I've worked freelance,
mhm,
like a product design consultant, and sometimes I do DIY projects at home, and I always feel that it's almost like you do get creative because
mhm,
these are creative processes, but you're like hemmed in, right? They
yeah,
basically feel like you're creating in a box kind of thing.
yeah.
Like, oh,
Oh, that's a good way of putting it.
I can only go this far with this thing because, like in your case, if it's a cake, I'm assuming it's something like a cake for a
Mhm.
party or something. Well, it's got to be there. You
Yeah,
can't just
yeah,
go
yeah,
like you just can't go crazy with like, okay, I'm
yeah,
gonna make this elaborate cake, but it'll be ready, but it won't be there on time, like because
yeah,
that's a pretty essential part of
yeah.
uh, yeah, no, I can see that. Like, and sometimes, so wait, do you think is this what is maybe happening to you? Is that you kind of get stimuli, right, from your
Mhm,
job,
mhm.
and then it sparks of ideas in your head. You go, okay, I gotta see, I gotta like execute on this because I can't do it in this commercial
Yes,
situation.
very much so. Like last night I was like, you know, focusing mainly on macarons and stuff. Um, but then I get ideas for flavors of macarons and or like, decorations that I want to do, which I usually decorate by technique, so I don't like draw or pipe something, which some people do. Instead, I'll use a technique of like how I swirl dye or how I put it in a bag or, to kind of manipulate the color. And I'm like, I just don't have time for that. Yesterday I wanted to do like a color swirls with sparkles on them. It's like I just don't have time. I have like, I made like 400 shells last night and like
Oh
all these
wow.
fillings. Yeah, and so it's like so it's just but then I come home and I'm like I start to bake and my mom's like, "You just got off your shift. What are you doing?" I'm like, I have to do this. I have to see this through." So yeah, I very much feel that. Yeah.
And what kind of, like, how would you classify yourself? Because I'll explain that a little bit.
Mhm,
Like, when I'm trying to like do a project that I want to
mhm,
do, one of the things that I like is the control, right? So I
mhm,
want
mhm,
it to be a certain way,
mhm,
and of course, it doesn't always turn out like that. And I think we talked a little bit about this earlier, where other people look and go, "Oh, yeah, that looks amazing, man."
mhm,
Oh, there's just like there's this flaw here, this problem here. And I kind of like it's a kind of a weird feeling. Like,
mhm,
a bit like what you said, right? The process was fun, but I kind of want that satisfaction in the end also because the way I
Mm,
imagined it.
mhm,
So, one, the questions are one, A, do you feel like that?
mhm,
And two, how do you actually deal with that feeling?
mm. I do feel like that a lot of times. And but I think I would classify myself as like a learner and experimenter. And so I think that's how I kind of cope with it, because at the end of the day, I learned something, even if it didn't come out right, because then it gets me closer to my actual goal that I want. Um, and it's the joy of like, even if it didn't come out how I wanted it, I was the one who manipulated it to come out in a certain way. And a lot of times, the thing is, like, I mean, you go back to the simple chocolate chip cookie. There's always people claiming this is the best chocolate chip cookie. There is no best chocolate chip cookie because everyone wants something different.
Mm,
It's very frustrating. And so sometimes I'm like, oh, it's so crunchy or it's spread too much. And someone else is like, that's exactly what I love about it. This is the perfect cookie. And so I'm like, well, okay, well, I guess I'll save this recipe for you then. And so it's sometimes you create something on accident. Sometimes there's a happy accident where, someone really loves it or appreciates it the way it is. And I think that's why you can also describe it as an art and creativity, because, it has that effect or that impact. Yeah.
yeah. So I also want to ask a little bit about maybe perhaps do you have a specific style? Like I'll give you my own example. I grew up
Mhm,
in India,
mhm,
so lots of spices in our
mhm,
foods, right? And what I've realized about myself is like even though I'll consume food from other cuisines,
mhm,
and specifically say Mexican cuisine, which I think there's lots of common ground there. I'll pick things and dishes that sort of have some of the same textures and spice
mhm, mhm,
levels as the food that I'm comfortable with. So if I were making something new, I
mhm,
think that would always be the case. Like I remember there's actually a friend of mine in England who did the British baking show,
mhm,
and a large part of her dishes, like even if she made more traditional
mhm,
English pastry, would always have like an Indian twist to it, right?
mhm, mhm.
And so that kind of became her signature, essentially,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel like I'm that type of person,
Mhm,
whether I'm making physical objects or cooking. So do you feel like because what you talked about earlier about there's no
mhm.
perfect chocolate chip
Yeah.
cookie, but you're like I make this perfect chocolate chip cookie in this way. This is the right way to make. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So are you? And obviously this is not on your commercial side.
Yeah.
Good. So are you like that? Are you like, do you have a specific signature that you've developed, you think?
I don't think so, but I think what I mainly try is like something with balance, something that
Okay.
has some type of complexity, but is not super insufferable or weird. But sometimes I like to go there too. So, but like I think mainly, what comes to mind when you describe that really is just how growing up, like, I mean, I mainly liked food. I didn't really like pastries, and I would prefer to eat just lots of food over baked goods. And I would always like eat the chocolate cake and be like, this is too chocolatey. I don't like this, or this is too sweet. This is too creamy. This is too rich. And so I kind of strive for something that like I want someone to eat something and feel like they just can eat more of it, because it's like it's
Mm.
delicious, but it's not like it's balanced.
Eh,
So if there
yeah.
is something super chocolatey, there's another flavor or something. I don't like more is more. But not necessarily less is more. I want it to be,
Yeah.
sometimes less is more, but
No,
but
no, I to
yeah.
be honest, I think I kind of exactly understand what you're saying
Mhm,
because I grew up in India and then I
mhm,
lived in the UK. And then when I came
mhm.
here, what I realized is if I got a chocolate cake here, for example, and I think it's maybe an American thing too, it was really, really sweet.
Yeah.
Right? It was like just commercial stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
why is this so sweet? So what automatically happened is I'd be like, "Oh, I'll take a couple of spoons." Whereas I feel
Mhm,
like when I was maybe in the UK, I would eat a whole slice
mhm.
because
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, I like that this is like too sweet." So
Yeah.
so maybe it's but so then what is your comment on that? You grew up here.
Mhm.
Do you think maybe and have you, tried cuisines or tried the same kind of pastry from other countries maybe? And do you think there's an American styling to this?
I do, and I think it like, um, I guess trying from, like, maybe more high-end stores is where I got, like I was like, "Oh, this is not like," or from bakeries that homemade stuff and, like,
Mhm,
had that
mhm.
kinda same mentality. I was like, "Oh, this is something you can do where it's not too rich or too sweet." And I remember I worked at Yamava, the casino and resort. I was a baker there for a few months, and I remember we had this giant brownie. It was, like, this big, and it was, like, covered in fudge icing with a fudge rosette, and it had, like, chocolate drizzle, chocolate shavings, like, crushed peanut butter stuff and, like, or, like, candy, and I was like, "This is, like," I was like, "Who wants to eat this? This sounds disgusting." And, like, I mean, some people do, and that's fine for them, but for me, I guess that's just, like, not something I want to strive for. And so, I mean, I guess it just comes from trying things, and I used to be picky to the p like, not to the point where I wouldn't, like, oh, I just wouldn't try things. I will only eat things that were familiar. Like, I always give this example is like red grapes and green grapes were fine because I grew up eating them. Then I tried Concord grapes, which are purple, and they tasted amazing, but I could not get past the idea that they were purple and it would freak me out. So I think just kind of branching out and being like tasting new things and from new things from people opened up my eyes to, like, this is something I can do myself, if I do like it, and kind of desensitizing myself to that. That's like a whole other spiel there.
Okay. No, but I do wanna ask you then,
Mhm,
because so what's the oddest flavors that you put into a big product
mhm.
that other people might go, "What? I like, why'd you put," like, and then it turned out, either good or bad, I guess. But
Uh-huh.
what was the weirdest or oddest or strangest experiment that you've done?
There's 2 things that came out that I did weird. One turned out okay, I guess, because everyone seemed to like it. The
Mhm.
other one was really weird. I didn't even like it, but it was a request. One person liked it. So the first one, I put MSG in a chocolate chip cookie just to see what would happen.
Okay.
And I mean, people seem to like it. They seem to, I don't know really what I didn't really understand if it really did anything, or but maybe it didn't really, I don't know if it added anything, but certainly didn't take anything away.
Okay.
So, but I haven't done that since. I was just a one-time thing just to see what would happen. And then the other thing, so a friend asked me to make an avocado cake. And the recipe they sent me was like this like TikTok viral recipe. And I was like, the crumb looks really bad. The measurements are inexact. So let me find another recipe. So I found another recipe. And the structure came out better. And then I went off and like, this also turned into a disaster. I was like, I'm gonna make an avocado chantilly. And I was thinking in my mind, like avocado desserts that some Asian cultures do. Like I'm half Vietnamese and there's like a condensed milk avocado thing that my dad used to drink. I'm not sure exactly what it was. But so the chantilly was just like whipped cream flavored and with whipped cream. And I was gonna flavor it with some avocado. And then I was gonna put that in layers, but it was too soft and it started collapsing. And then I was like, this needs some kind of balance. So I put raspberry jelly, which thankfully it was there because it made it at least half edible. But then I made like a French buttercream and made that avocado. It was just too much avocado. It tasted way too avocado. The friend who asked for it seemed to like it, took it home unless they were lying to me. But everyone else was like, oh, but I'm not sure I can eat the rest of this. And I was like, yeah, I can't eat it either. Don't worry. So that was the weirdest thing I made.
Yeah, that sounds kinda odd. When you tried to share, and I was going, but I'm actually definitely fascinated by the MSG chocolate chip. I must admit more than the avocado, 'cause, there's some Indian dishes that I use MSG in,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and I know, like, it pops the flavor,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but they're always savory, so I'm super intrigued by what you said.
Because I think people I love salty sweet stuff, but also I feel like even if it's not to the point where you taste salty sweet,
Mhm.
people often undersalt their desserts. And I think so I was like, what would MSG do? So
Oh,
that's kind of where that came from.
I think I'm gonna suggest it to my daughter. Try. No, but I don't think she'll go for it. She's very much the more, she likes the more genteel. She also likes less sweet, but she likes the more
Mm,
genteel flavors. So I don't think this
I
is,
see.
thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. That's
Yeah.
pretty, wild. Because that made me think of, um, when I was in India,
Mhm.
one time, I actually ate like a green chili ice cream.
Oh, wow.
Um, and I wouldn't want to repeat the experience, but it was fun when I did,
Okay.
because the green chilies are really spicy in India, like,
Oh,
really
okay.
spicy.
Mhm.
And so what was intriguing about eating it as an ice cream was, when you ate the ice cream, it felt like eating sort of a vanilla ice cream with a little bit of something
Mhm.
extra in it, because it's cold and sweet.
Mhm.
You're able to eat it like a regular ice
Yeah.
cream. But the minute it's in your mouth and starts to warm up,
Uh-huh.
it gets super spicy.
Oh, wow.
So it was a very interesting experience. 'Cause
Yeah.
the and the what that makes you do is eat more ice cream, right?
Yeah.
'Cause, you're trying to, mitigate the spiciness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was a very so okay, so partly why I brought that up was once to share my anecdote, but also I wanted to ask you, have you kind of done something that's maybe not just flavor related,
Mhm.
but more texture related sometimes, which have been odd? Like,
Mm.
where it's been unexpected. I think that's what I'm trying to dig into. And wait, do you also have pictures of that?
Pictures of
Any
the
of the, odd stuff, texture-wise?
oh, the ti I don't think so. I'm sorry to disappoint. I haven't gotten to like weird tech. I'm aversive to textures. It's funny because like even when I bake, um, like when I make the dough, I'm like I have to wear gloves because I just hate touching the butter or
Okay.
the dough or something. So if I see it as an unusual texture, I don't like. I like I like playing with texture to where it's more traditional, like chewy and and crisp at the end, something that like you look for traditionally in a baked good. As for something more unusual, I haven't played with that usually because that's not something that I'm usually very fond of.
Okay.
I find it a little bit icky.
Okay, that's fair.
But
So let me get your take on something. I've seen these shorts videos on YouTube and on TikTok where and I think this is a big viral thing where
Mhm,
they'll show you something like an object that
mhm.
looks like something else. Like it'll be steak,
Oh,
it'll be a cake inside, it'll be a
yeah.
shoe with a cake
Uh-huh.
inside. And so that's more, I would call it, that's more art, right? Like that
Mhm,
the shape of it, the color of it is more important than.
mhm.
But what's your take on that? Like, what do you think of that trend? Because it's been going strong for a while, though, right? I've seen it
Yeah. Uh-huh.
quite a bit.
I mean, I do enjoy that content. I think it's because it's something that I would never be able to do because honestly, I'm not someone who's very artistic or
Mm,
focuses on the decoration very much. Um, so yeah, like I always admire people who decorate. Like I mean, even the cake decorators at the bakery, they're so talented. But they might, not focus with or play with flavors or texture or the science of it too much. They might just be like, "Oh, this recipe works and it's very good and I get good feedback." Not like, "Oh, I want the crumb to be a little bit more moist or a little bit more open," or, so that's kind of how like so it's another art form that I appreciate that I feel like is out of my league. So I think that's why I enjoy it. So I'm not yeah, but I think it's like something I would never be able to do. Yeah.
well, the one other question I want to ask you is, and you touched upon this a little bit, but
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about what kind of satisfaction you get, or what do you get out of baking, other than um, the physical food itself, and
Yeah.
maybe somebody asked you, so you have like a request. But what
Mhm.
does it do for you personally? Like, i- is there, have you kind of analyzed that? Is there a box that you can tick and say, when I do baking, I can tick this box type of thing?
I mean, there's a concept uh in positive psychology called flow,
Okay.
where you're equally challenged, but you're also equally skilled in having fun.
Mhm.
And I think I've got and you just lose sense of time because you're in this moment where you're just focusing, you're getting things done. And it's such a balance of, stimulating from the challenge, but also rewarding from being skilled enough to get what you want and be good at it. And baking very much is that kind of like experience for me. I mean, like I do enjoy singing a lot, but I'm not skilled enough to ever
Mhm.
feel that kind of flow sensation. Drawing the same way, and it takes build up. I never achieved this flow when I first started baking. I mean, those cupcakes I first baked were dry, so it takes a while it took a while for me to build up to reach this sensation. But now that I do, it's a way to for me to decompress, to de-stress from, from school, from internship, from people not from people interpersonal stuff. Like, I mean, I'll be baking at 2 in the morning and someone's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I just need to let it out, sometimes it's easier to start baking than go out for a walk at 2 in the morning because I don't want there to be any spiders on me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, you think you've become a lot more popular since you started baking?
It is a way to connect with people and get people to come back. I think I have, to be honest, because I always like I will save some for myself and my little sister to sample. My one thing is I have to try a little bit like out of the oven, and then
Mhm.
also the next day because it's easy to make something taste good fresh hot out of the oven. It's a challenge to make it stay ideal in the way you want it because also that's when people usually are eating it. They're not eating it fresh from the oven. So I want to make sure what I'm giving them tastes good. So I always keep a little bit for myself and my sister, but then I always give it away. And so now I have my roster of like people I give it to. And I also have people I have categories who will give me like black and white feedback versus the shades of gray and or people who will just be like, oh, it's good, or so I also have people who I give back who I actually want feedback or just who I want to share, and I just rotate through my roster of people. So yeah.
Nice. Nice. And is there like a mailing list people can join? Be at the receiving end of that?
Oh my gosh. I one time I mailed a box of macarons to a friend as a thank you. And with ice and with everything like overnight shipping and the weight of the package ended up being over $200. It was very
Oh,
ridiculous.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's like what do you think is going to be next for you? I know from the way you said it, this is very much like a creative process, and
Mhm.
what you described, the flow. That's incredible. And when you find it, and I think that's part of what I was why I talk to makers is because everybody has their own sense of flow, where basically the challenge and your skill at it kind of are in a good harmony, and then
Mhm.
you kind of like just keep going, right?
Yeah.
And I felt that when I make like things when I do DIY and I'm making
Mhm.
like chairs and tables and stuff. I felt that, so I know
Mhm.
exactly what you're saying. But outside of that, what's next? Like, do you feel like you would maybe start your own bakery,
Mhm.
go on a cooking competition? Like, what do you have any thoughts? Like, how are you gonna extend this? Or
You
or
know,
or
it's
are you planning to extend it?
it's funny, and actually my definite answer is I'm not planning to extend it because working in a professional setting, I've realized that it kind of disrupts that flow. And that's what I love most about it. And it's been always such a source of comfort for me, baking. And I think that to um, to go further with it would kind of rob me of that joy. Um, and so right now it's just to always keep that passion alive and making sure that it stays alive. So it is, sometimes I will try something new and experiment and grow, like doing it professionally. But then I realize that that's one of the things that takes the passion away. So it's kind of just always, I mean, like I said, I like to learn and experiment, and not just for baking, but for everything. So just keeping that passion alive to keep learning and to bring some sort of outlet to be creative and learn at the same time is just my goal. It's just to keep that there. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, and then one last thing.
Mhm.
What's the next thing you're making or baking?
I'm actually making something right now. I have croissant dough proofing, and I'm gonna make some croissants. I'm gonna make them mini because there's lots of guests, and my recipe doesn't make a lot because I don't have huge equipment. So, gonna make mini croissants. Yeah,
Nice. Okay.
yeah.
Well, Owen, thank you so much for sharing and telling us a little bit about your passion.
Mhm.
I'm certainly intrigued and also a little bit hungry. So thank you so much for being on the Be a Maker Club podcast and sharing your story.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.